I'm Mike Lyons, and I'll be the host for another oral history for the Jacksonville Broadcasters Association. The association's purpose is to preserve the rich history and contributions of the area's radio, television, and broadcasting industries. And my guest today for this oral history is Steve Smith, a longtime weatherman, weather forecaster, meteorologist at Channel 12, where you spent 28 and a half years, a very popular broadcaster here. And thanks for joining us here today.
Oh, thank you for the invite. I'm honored.
As we speak, we're in May 2019. But Steve, first of all, let's talk about this. Was kind of interesting. You began your broadcasting career in high school.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
I was a senior in high school, and a lot of us back then, you started your career. A lot of people started their career in radio before they ventured into TV. And so I was in a situation where we had just moved to my mom's hometown, originally from Indiana, and I didn't necessarily want to go back to bagging groceries, the typical teenage type of thing, and I already had a license. I had a third-class license with an Element 9 endorsement, if you remember that type of thing. Yeah. So I went to the radio station thinking, okay, I'm going to sweep up, you know, I'm just a kid, 17, and the general manager tells me, said, well, you know, we had 3 announcers quit. You ever think about getting on the air? And you know, that was a quick decision. You know?
So the idea of broadcasting, that was not in your mindset.
No, it was. It was. I wanted to do it.
You wanted to do it.
But because, I'm a 17-year-old kid, I didn't think they'd really give me a job on the air. So my plan was, I'm going to get in here. They're going to give me a job sweeping up and taking out the trash. And one day, the announcer that's in there is going to have to go to the bathroom and stay a long time, and the record's going to run out, and that's when I'm going to dash in there and do my thing, you know, and they're going to hire me as an announcer. But as it turned out, they hired me as an announcer right off the bat, but it was a small station, so.
And you worked the weekends.
Yeah, I did work the weekends, 3 to midnight on Saturdays, and the station signed off because there was a super powerful station in Mexico that signed on in that frequency right after we signed off, so we had to get off the air. So I would 3 to midnight on Saturday and then noon to 6 on Sunday.
So then you graduated from high school and you went to the University of Alabama.
Oh, roll tide,
Roll
man.
Tide, baby.
Roll Tide,
okay. What did you study there at Alabama?
I was a communications major, broadcast and film communication. Eventually I minored in business, but you know, I was one of those people where I was gung-ho about getting into broadcasting, and then I said, well, you know, the money's kind of low here, so I changed over to psychology, speech pathology, and then I said, you know what? I said, this running my mouth is in my blood, so I'm going to go back to that, and come hell or high water, I'm going to make it work.
Right. Running your mouth, that's why we have you as a guest today. Great job.
Okay.
And while you went to the University of Alabama, you continued in radio while you were in school. Tell me about that.
During the summers, the little town that I was telling you about that I was working in, they were always looking for people, so I would let them know that I'd be home for the summer, and they would still have a slot for me. In fact, you know, Thanksgiving vacation, Christmas vacation, I would let the guys know, said, hey, I'm going to be in for Thanksgiving vacation, so if you need some time off, and so I'd be able to come home and make some money during Thanksgiving, do it again during Christmas.
Everybody wanted time off.
Yeah,
that was not a problem.
And this was a mom and pop operation, literally. A man and his wife owned the station. It was we were live on the AM, and it was automated FM. Now, automation back then wasn't like it is now. I mean, you had a big machine sitting over in the corner that had 4 reel-to-reel tapes, if you remember the Drake Chenault company. So it was automated country on the other side, and so every Friday they had payroll ready. So I could come in, work a few days of shifts, and on Friday snatch my check off the bulletin board and go on about my business. It was a great deal, and I was continuing to build my experience.
Right. You graduated from Alabama, Roll Tide again,
Thank
and
you.
then you leave there and you stayed in radio. What'd you do when you got out of?
I was only home for maybe a week, 2 at the most, and I got a call from WTUG radio, which was R&B FM, and they were looking for somebody in the sales department. Well, I'd never done sales directly before. I was always, radio disc jockey, but I said, okay, I'll take it. And it was a good experience. It was good to get a feel for the business side of broadcasting, but at the same time, because of my behind the mic experience, instead of selling contracts and accounts, I was selling a lot of remotes. So I would be out on Saturdays holding down remotes, hey, come in, we're over here at the such and such store, and if you come by and
So
say
you
hi.
announce what you sold.
Yeah, right. And so it was easy to do because I never had to worry about which disc jockey I'm going to call. Say, hey, man, I got a remote set up for Saturday. Oh, man, I can't do that. Oh, heck, I'll do it myself, and I'll pocket the fee for doing it.
How'd you end up in television?
Eventually, I always wanted to go into television, wanted to do a number of things, because even at the University of Alabama, I spent a lot of time in the theater department, and I would audition for shows and got into a number of them. And I'll get back to that a little bit later. But I ended up in Selma. I left Tuscaloosa, ended up in Selma at this one particular station because not only were they offering the air shift, but I had a chance to do some football play-by-play. They did the high school broadcast for Selma High School. Not that I was any football expert, wasn't even a major football fan, even though I went to one of the major football schools in the country. I was kind of a casual football fan. So I had to bone up on some things I had to learn, and so that was a good experience. Then things didn't quite work out the way I wanted to, so I went across town to another R&B station, and this was small staff, small resources, but they gave me the opportunity to do everything that I thought I wanted to do. So if I wanted to go out and do some radio news reporting, they would let me do it. They put me in charge of music and some of the programs. So basically I had a manager's title with the disc jockey's salary. And it was from the experience of doing the news reporting there that I would be shoulder to shoulder with the guys from the local TV station and the newspaper. So when I decided I wanted to expand, I went to the TV station and I had all my usual stuff, my resume and this, that, and the other for the general manager. And I'm sitting there with him and he said, Steve, I know who you are and I know what you can do. I just need to know when you can come work. And that's even a funnier story because as I was going into the TV station, a guy was coming out that I recognized from the University of Alabama. We had seen each other on campus and we were talking. And I'm going to broach a little bit of a touchy subject here. He told me, he said, hey man, they'll give you a job, but they're not necessarily going to let you advance much because they don't give African Americans much chance to advance at this station. And I was like, okay. He said, yeah, they'll put you in the studio and you'll stay in the corner. But as I'm talking to the general manager, he said, Steve, I don't have any on-air jobs. I just have a job in the studio in master control. But he said, look, I don't want you to just stay there. I want you to learn everything you think you can get a handle on. And so a year from now, I don't want to see you just sitting in a t-shirt in that control room. I want to know that you've mastered some stuff and gained some more skills so I can use you where I can use you any place. And I'm like, that's not what the guy just told me going out the door. It wasn't a racial thing. It was a question of, abilities and what the management thought you could do. And that was a pretty good place to work for anybody that just had the eagerness and or the skill or wanting to develop the skills to do more things.
So you went on to another TV station in Tuscaloosa, I believe you told me.
Right.
From there.
From there, it was there was a couple of expansions that went on because I was part of when I was in Selma at Channel 8, it was WSLA. It later became Channel 8 in Montgomery. We had a bad tornado came through there. And our tower, which was on the premises of the station, actually fell down on top of the building. The tornado blew it down. So it smashed the news director's office. We weren't in there. I was in the studio at the time. We didn't have a radar at the station then. I think we had the old AP wire machine, but that was about it. So we did the noon news. We were back in the regular programming. Then all of a sudden somebody said, oh, the sky's getting dark. Then they said, the guide wires, I think, are snapping. Then the next thing I knew, the roof was just shaking. So I dove under a table. And the next thing we knew, the antenna, the tower had fallen on the building. And, this was like, I think they said, I can't remember if they said 55,000 tons or 55 tons. But those things, I mean, they're really huge and heavy.
So you were lucky to get to Jacksonville.
Yeah, I was like, so between that and the lawsuit, the station ended up putting a tall tower just outside Montgomery, and it expanded, so it became a Montgomery station instead of the Selma Market station. They had to expand, they had to add more people, add more equipment, totally upgrade. And so then it was after that that I made the jump to Tuscaloosa.
And you reported in Tuscaloosa?
I reported in Tuscaloosa. I had started reporting in Selma. I moved out of the control room, became a reporter there, then started reporting and anchor. Well, I was doing both. I was anchor reporter in Selma, then news anchor reporter in Tuscaloosa as well.
Right.
Doing reporting more than I was anchoring.
So you end up at a station in Mobile.
Right.
And that's how you go into weather. You had no intentions of doing weather.
No. See, back then you got to understand something. A lot of us were still fresh with the idea of Watergate. We wanted to be reporters. We were going to save the world. We were going to protect the little guy from bad business and unscrupulous politicians, you know, that type of thing.
Right.
You know, so we, you know, there we were, champions of the little guy. And so, you know, the weather, well, you know, if you couldn't get a job in sports, then you got a job in weather. Weather wasn't the glamorous, synchronized mechanism that it is now. I mean, it's serious business, it's scientific, but now it's a whole industry unto itself. It wasn't like that back then.
Right.
I mean, back then, some stations would literally hire the popular disc jockey across town and have them do weather. Right. You know, and it didn't matter whether they had any kind of weather background or not. Right. So yeah, it was in Mobile, and the funny story behind that was our weekend weather guy left. And the news director came into the newsroom and he said, guys, we've got a position open on the weekends. We need a weekend weather guy. And everybody was like, I said, well, the staff in Mobile, the newsroom was so talented. I said, I'm probably never going to get a chance to anchor news, so maybe this weather thing might be a chance to expand myself a little bit. So I'm like, and so he looked over at me and said, okay, guys, I need a volunteer to do weather. I'm like,
So you didn't even know the difference in the clouds when you first started in weather.
No. So I'm over here, I'm like, you know, I was like the guy at the airport. I took out my signal things and I'm like, you know, he's looking for volunteers and I'm doing like this. And so finally he said, Steve, you want to do this? Yeah. So I said, okay, we'll put Steve on the job. And the other reporters were like, you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. I said, why not?
That turned out to be a great decision, didn't it?
It did. Weather's boring, man. You're going to fall asleep in the middle of the forecast, you know. And my first weathercast was in the mornings on Christmas Eve, I think it was. And so there was no major weather going on, so it was going to be a routine day, but it gave me a chance to use more of my personality skills and blend in my reporting skills at the same time. And so it was loose in the morning and we were telling jokes and going back and forth. And later in the day, the news staff came in and they were like, man, we saw you this morning. You were having fun. That was really good. And I'm like, too late now. Back off. You know, I got the job.
Wow, and so Mobile, and eventually you did a lot of weather there and came here. One question I talked to you earlier about was, as a black reporter, black weatherman on TV station in Alabama in the 80s, how were you received? Was that a problem at all? Or?
No, it was, believe it or not, it was never a problem. And I know people would say, well, wow, you were in Selma and the history of Selma and all the things that happened with the marches and voting rights and so forth. But believe it or not, when Channel 8 in Selma expanded and became a Montgomery station, we had to hire more reporters and more anchors and get more equipment in there. The newsroom was so diverse, we used to laugh and say, hey, we're missing something. We need to hire some more white men. Because we had African-American men, African-American women, we had female producers, and you know, you look at it now and you say, female producers, why is that a problem? Well, back then, most of your producers were either ex-reporters or ex-photographers that for various reasons decided, you know what, I don't want to rip and run on the street anymore, I'd rather be inside, kind of shaping the newscast as opposed to. And so you didn't have a whole lot of women in the newsroom in that capacity, but we had a very diverse staff at that time in Selma. And even doing weather in Mobile, it was, Willard Scott was doing the Today Show. Al Roker would show up occasionally, so some people would start to call me Slim Al Roker, but no, it never was a problem, not at all. Well received. In fact, in Selma, I got an award from I think it was the Butterfly Society, because when I was there, it was the first time an African American was running for mayor against the man that put Martin Luther King in jail. And that man was not necessarily a bigot. He was just a politician. He didn't want to put Martin Luther King in jail, but the mood of the town had him do it. But when I saw him operate, I saw him on the street. He'd hug black people, cuss out some white people. You know, he did what he had to do in order to stay politically active. And so you had the two guys running, and so the networks were there, and and we were, you know, sitting there talking with them. And then all of a sudden, when things started to jump, they pushed us little folks out of the way, the network people did, so they could, you know, start doing their thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, so where were you guys when we were named the butterfly capital of Alabama, you know? And so they took that, they put that statement in the newspaper, and all of a sudden, you know, it's like, you know, I got love all over town, you know?
Yeah. So you're doing weather in Mobile,
Yeah.
and then that led you here to Jacksonville,
Sure.
WTLB. How did that come to pass?
Actually, one of the other weather guys had come here to interview, and he didn't think it was necessarily for him, but he was saying, hey, I went to this station. They're looking for people on the weekends. Said, I think you'd love it. The news director is kind of young and hip and And so I'm like, I don't know if I want to leave Mobile, but I'll send him a tape anyway. The next thing I knew, they sent me a letter, plane tickets, and I'm flying over here to do an interview. You know, I'm like, okay, this is cool.
So you come to 12, you're on the weekends working with Jeannie Blaylock.
Yeah.
And everything. What'd you think of Jacksonville in Channel 12 when you first got here?
I was, man, I was impressed with the whole operation. I mean, I had a chance for a day or two sitting in a hotel to watch the news, and the first thing that impressed me was, I said, this Ken Amaro guy is really good. I said, he must be the best young reporter in town. I mean, he is really something else. And yeah, he is. He was then and he is now. He's really something else.
So you met Ken Amaro. He made sure you did that when you walked in the station. Didn't
Yeah, I did that. And Ken Amaro, I remember the first staff meeting we had. Ken Amaro kind of took me under the wing that day and kind of gave me pointers on what may be happening and how long it may last and so forth and so on. And he's a good fella.
Yeah.
He's a good fella.
You're doing the weekends. You tell me you moved to the 5:30, and that was a totally new show at the time. And
Yeah.
most back in those days, people had a 6 and 11.
Right. And so we branched out into the 5:30, and they wanted it to be a little bit different. It was still going to be the news, but it was going to have, I guess, a little more of an easygoing flavor. So myself and Jeannie, we were moved there, and it was different. Now I'm working a little more with Tim Deegan, and that was fun. Tim, you talk about a smart weatherman. Oh my goodness! This
So you
guy.
learned a lot from Tim. then, guess.
I learned a lot from Tim, and I had to at that time because the marketplace, the TV industry, was starting to transition then from the good communicator factor in weather to, okay, technology was allowing us to have more radars, more local radars, but Channel 12 had already had their own local radar. And so they were looking for more people that had weather or science-based backgrounds in order to fill the positions.
I see. And
And
that
so-
wasn't you, because you never intended to do weather.
Well, I never intended to do weather, but I had to go back to school. I ended up at Mississippi State in the broadcast meteorology program, which I would say probably almost half of the weather people that you see on TV now have probably been through Mississippi State in one form or another.
Did you do that there? Are you from Jacksonville? Or did
Yeah, it was a distance learning program.
Yeah.
So at least at that time, they would send you tapes and or discs with the lectures on it, and I had to go to the National Weather Service where they sent my test materials, and the meteorologists at the National Weather Service would proctor my exams.
So did the 5:30, that was a new deal, and then you moved to the morning. I understand
then I
that was a
moved
totally new deal, right?
Yeah.
Everybody has a morning show now, but that wasn't the case back then.
But you know what? I wasn't a big morning believer back then because at least my experience through Alabama was people didn't really watch morning news all that much until like the Today Show and Good Morning America when that was coming on. And stations that had morning news, it was usually for that old guy that had been there 200 years and he was a nice guy, didn't want to fire him. And then you had some young kid that was eager beaver, so slap them on there too, and that's what you had. And nowadays morning shows are a science and a necessity. It's a very needed entity, but I was surprised to learn that in this market and several other markets, people depended on the morning show. And once I saw that, my attitude changed completely.
So it was another great decision that you got to go to the morning, and
Oh, yes.
you lived there for many, many years, didn't
Yeah,
you?
for probably about 28 and a half years, probably a good 25 or 26 of those was spent on the morning show.
And you worked with a lot of different people, but I guess Phil Amato, Patty Crosby, those are two you worked for
Oh,
with
we worked
many,
together
many
for a
years.
long time. Yeah, when I initially got there, Mike Moore, if you remember, he had that golden throat. Mike Moore. I mean, he had a set of pipes you would just die for. Joan Lovett, I believe, was the co-anchor there, and we had a living room set. We had a news desk and a living room set, and most of what we did came off the living room set. Yeah.
So that was just a totally new experience and a lot of teamwork on the morning show.
Yeah, it's just a handful of people there, so the producers, the anchors, and the reporters, we all have to kind of pull together. It doesn't mean that it was sunshine and flowers every day, but it was just us, and we knew we had to make it happen.
Yeah. What was the most unique thing about switching to working the morning show to you?
Like I said, at first I was surprised at the public response, at the amount of people that watched the morning news. The other thing was trying to get my personal life together so I could deal with the early hours, because most of the time I was getting up about 2 in the morning in order to get in there. And at first the show started at 6. Then they backed it to 5:30, then to 5, then eventually it was starting at 4:30. But still, even with that, just knowing that, okay, I know I'm going to have to get up at this amount of time, so I can't spend too much time out in the evening doing this, this, and this unless I plan it. I would go home and take a nap.
Right.
And then, but also the free form compared to the evening news. Because you can tell more jokes and have more conversations in the morning. You're still doing the serious news. You've still got to get the information out there that people need to know to get their day started. But you got to be their buddy a little bit. You got to be their friend. Hey, good morning. Here's what happened while you were sleeping, and here's what's going to impact you while you're going through your day. It's almost like you're sitting at the breakfast table with a cup of coffee and you're having a conversation with them.
And you stayed there. You must have really loved it. You fell in love with the morning
I
because you
did.
stayed there for the rest
I
of
did that
your
and
time.
the noon show, because I saw what people were looking for. I saw the necessity for it, and a lot of people say, well, when are you going to move to the evening news? Well, to me, I was looking at the whole team, especially the weather team. I was like, man, we can be strong in the morning, strong in the evening, and we will have a good, solid block there for our news product in general. So I said, to me, there's no need to try to fight over who's going to still be the 6 p.m. anchor. I'm like, Tim was doing a very good job where he was, and I'm like, I'm going to plant my flag right here on the morning show and do my thing, so that way people will say, no matter which guy I tune into, Channel 12 is strong.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned your personality. That really fit in with the morning more so than any other place.
Yeah, I'm a Gemini. So other than weekends, I've got, I'm all over the place, split personality. So yeah, I'll tell you a joke and then, all right, now about that tornado,
Right. You could do the switch.
Yeah, I could do the switch, and it was allowable on the mornings.
Mm-hmm. What did you like most about being a broadcaster in Jacksonville, Florida?
Oh. Wow, there's so many things. I'm going to go back to audience response, because even during the time I was in Mobile and Selma and Montgomery, there was some response, but people here really paid particular attention to the folks that were coming into their living rooms and their bedrooms via the TV. I mean, they could say, well, the other day you didn't look too good. Are you feeling okay? Are you coming down with something? Or if you mention something about a pet or a family member, they remembered that. So I knew we were reaching people because they were paying attention to those little details, And I think one time we had a story with all the things, the serious things that go on with news that impact your life. We did this one little blurb about these roaches that were supposed to be coming up from South America that seemed to be impervious to our current bug sprays and insecticides and stuff. And that's what people started talking to me about. Tell me about those roaches. I mean, we only did that story once in the show, and for about a week, all I heard people talking about was, hey man, I heard about the roaches. What's going on with the roaches?
Yeah. It's amazing the impact of broadcasting.
Yeah, and
on
and the, and
people's
the
lives.
love of people, because even when I left First Coast News, the thing that I heard from a lot of people was, thank you for your service. You know, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, I'm not ex-military. You know, and so somebody told me, they said, look, whether you realize it or not, the weather team is similar to a first responder, police, fire, because you're right there when the storms are coming in, when the damage is hitting, and you're helping people navigate through it. So they see you as not just a weather guy, but also like a first responder. So that's why they were thanking you for the service.
That had to make you feel good.
Oh man, did it ever! But I'll tell you what, they got me one time because we were having a tropical storm was coming in here during Memorial Day, and I forget which one is the end of May. Is that Memorial Day? So I had been on the air telling people, you know, you need to get your supplies and It's a tropical storm, but we could have power outages, this, that, and the other. And so, you know, I'm sitting up here, I'm telling people to get supplies, and I ain't got a thing at my house. So I stopped at the store to get some supplies, and it was packed. The parking lot was packed. And I was like, oh my goodness, they were listening. when First Coast News tells them they need to get supplies, well, I was looking at people, and I said, look at these people. Look at all these carts filled to the brim. And I'm like, yeah, this is good. Hot dog.
So I always thought you should be honorary board members of the National Plywood Association.
So upon further review, as I'm looking at these people and their buggies full, I saw water, but I saw mostly hamburger meat, hot dogs, buns, ribs. I said, they're not stocking up. These folks getting ready to barbecue. Man, they're not thinking about this tropical storm. They're getting the grill fired up. That's what and man, my ego just, whoo, you know.
Yeah. Ken Thomas was a photographer, longtime
Yes.
photographer, 12, and he wanted me to ask you about a thing y'all did, Where in the World is Steve?
Oh, man.
Tell me about that.
Okay. That was a spin-off of, or a local follow-up to Where in the World is Matt Lauer? And, you know, I guess that was a spin-off of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? So, you know, they used to send Matt Lauer out to these places, and the Today Show people had to guess, where am I? And he would give them clues, and they had to guess. And so we decided to do that locally, and Ken was phenomenal on that stuff because, you know, we had to be creative. We had to keep Phil and Patty kind of in the dark as to where I was going, and hopefully the producers weren't tipping it off with cross chatter and stuff.
Right.
And we went to some fairly interesting places and some interesting, met some interesting people, and one in particular was, I ended up at the, on Myrtle Avenue, just up the street from the barbershop. I mean, just up the street from the ballpark, there's this barbershop that was there a long time. And so they talked about when the Negro Leagues played there, when Jackie Robinson came to the ballpark. So what we did was, I'm sitting in the chair, they're literally giving me a haircut, not holding the clippers. I mean, you know, I don't have much hair. So they were, you know, they were taking some down and trimming the mustache. So I'm trying to talk to them, and they're telling stories about Jackie Robinson and the Negro Leagues and all the people that come to the ballpark.
Oh, wow. How has broadcasting changed from when you started to when you finished up? How did you see it change?
Oh, the technology for one. I mean, my goodness. I'll talk about weather. The station in Selma, the weather guy there literally had a blackboard-looking thing, and it looked like he had a bottle of shoe polish, and he'd draw fronts on there and stuff. And sometimes it would run, you know. And like I said, we didn't have a radar. Right. I don't know if he was getting any kind of weather information except for the forecast, and that's what he was doing. You know, we were still, and I had done this too, and you may remember this when you had the portable cameras, and there was a cable that connected to a porta-pack. And so you had the pack on one shoulder, you had the camera on the other shoulder, and now you can use your cell phone to do most of your reporting now, but you know, then they have the smaller cameras that you can use.
I remember magnetic numbers that stick on the board for temperatures.
Right. You know, but even the concentration of subjects that you reported on, because as I was first getting into TV, most stations were trying to convince people that we have the best I team in town. You know, going back to protecting the little guy. So, you know, the corrupt politicians, the bad businessmen, our I team will investigate. And you used to see billboards with the I team on there, you know, and things like that. Then it sort of went away, and then weather became more of the focus, especially as the live truck technology started to become more prevalent. So, you know, now instead of then it became instead of, you know, our I team is going to protect the little guy, we're going to be first in place when the storm smashes your neighborhood. You know, we were going to be right there. That literally wasn't it, but that's what it sort of felt like. And now with the internet and social media, I mean, everybody's a reporter now. I mean, you know, we didn't have the internet for a good portion of our career, so we were the eyes and ears of the public. Now the public has access to all this stuff. They can do their own reporting.
Right. We got all kind of stories in broadcasting. You've told a bunch of them.
Okay.
What would be, if you had to say, what's your go-to story, your favorite story of all time? What would you say that would be?
The favorite story of all time. When I was at the R&B station in Selma, I mean, it was R&B, but it was heavy on the blues too. I mean, at times it was almost an old-fashioned classic station. Do you remember the TV show WKRP in Cincinnati? Yeah. We had some elements of that at that station because if you remember, there was one character on that show, Dr. Johnny Fever. He was, you know, but back in the day in broadcasting, a lot of people would have a little something under the desk that they would sip. Johnny would sip too much. Well, I was the early morning guy at that station, and we had just hired this guy that I was like, what in the world? I didn't know who he was or what he was, but he had this way with people, and he was sort of the embodiment of Dr. Johnny Fever. So one morning at 4:30, it's dark as all get out, and I had to climb up these stairs that were dark in order to get into the station and open it up. I opened it up, and when you open it up, you're straight into the lobby, and there was this image, this lump on the couch. And there was, you know, and I almost jumped out of my skin because there was this guy laid out, and he had his bottle of party favors still stuck in his hand, you know, and he was like, oh. He was just laid out there, and I'm like, oh my God, what is this? But that was kind of the flavor of broadcasting back then. You had, you know, interesting people, unusual characters, and I wouldn't trade that for the world. I'm so glad I had that experience.
What would you tell young people today that are considering and want to be in the broadcasting business? What would you tell them?
From what I see now, be as versatile as you can, be as well-versed in the tools with the internet and use of social media, because in a lot of situations now, you know, we started out as one-man bands because it was small markets, and when you got to Jacksonville's, Orlando's, Miami, New York, Chicago, you had crews that went out with you to help you put stories together. Well, now, a lot of this you either have to do yourself or you can because of the technology, so be very versatile, but also keep in mind, too, still do the story, still look for the who, what, when, where, how, why, because to me, when you look at the TV news now, one of the things to me that's missing is a lot of the real details, the deep details of the story. And what's the story behind the story? And just remember the tradition, because that's what we were taught. You know, we were taught about the, you know, the Sinclairs and the other people that, you know, when unions and management were having fights, you know, they used to hide at union meetings so they could get the story, but the story had to be told. Remember to tell the story. There's two sides to every story, and you aren't the star. The facts are, and the people involved.
Versatility, you mentioned that. Versatility led you to do weather.
Yes.
It led you to a great 28-and-a-half-year career here in Jacksonville.
Man, I love the people here. The people have loved me, and I'm so grateful for that. I don't know what to do. When my wife and I go somewhere, people, you know, I'm like, oh, they still like me. Okay.
Well, we loved having you as a guest today.
Oh,
on
man,
this
I
Oral
enjoyed
History.
it.
Enjoyed it, Steve. Great.
Thank you.
There we go. Perfect.